that's when the decline begins. And as it begins, by the time we're 35, we're making half, maybe less than half what we made when we were like 12.
Wow.
And so by the time we hit like 55, 60, we're making almost none. Very little melatonin is being produced by the body. Circadian rhythm is our 24-hour internal clock in our brain, and that regulates not only sleepiness, but also alertness. So it's that 24-hour cycle. And it does this by responding to light changes in our environment, also known as our biological clock.
Welcome to episode 159 of the Healthy Habit Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dayan of Healthy Habit Medical Center, located right inside Healthy Habit Health Foods. And if you're new to the show here, you can find us on YouTube at the Healthy Habit Podcast, Anchor, and much more here. Our episodes are played in the store. Store is open 7 days a week. Clinic open Tuesdays through Saturdays, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And on this check-in here, our monthly check-in with Natural Factors, we'll be talking with Maria Maroney, who's an integrative nutritionist with decades of natural products industry experience across both retail and practitioner channels, including work for the esteemed Institute of Functional Medicine, the IFM. Maria holds a master's degree in clinical nutrition from Maryland University of Integrative Health. While she maintains a food-first approach, she's keenly aware of the lack of nutrients in foods grown today and firmly believes in the positive impact the right supplements can have on human health and wellness. Maria is a skilled and passionate educator committed to evidence-based nutrition, cutting through all the misinformation and delivering content that inspires others to live healthier lives. And I'm excited to have Maria on as a first time here on the podcast, representing Natural Factors here for episode 159. Maria, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much. That was quite a lot.
That was a good intro, and I'm excited to have you here, right? We want to cut through that misinformation. That's what we have this show for. We want to help educate our loyal customers who have been shopping here for 20 plus years here at Healthy Habit. We want to give them the good info. So today we're going to be discussing why we should be reevaluating our uses for melatonin. In fact, we have in quotes there, vitamin melatonin. So where do you want to start us off with on today's topic?
Let's see. Usually I ask how you slept last night.
Me?
Yeah.
I slept good. I wake up kind of just to turn. Is that normal? I think it's healthy. I wake up refreshed. I don't know if that's normal. I've been researching this, to be honest, because I wake up just to you know what I mean? I don't get up out of bed, but overall, I think it's good. Good
Yeah.
8 hours. So
Well, we don't just go to sleep and fall asleep. We cycle through sleep cycles all through the night, and there's 4 different stages of sleep. So, sometimes it's a very light stages, and that's probably what you're talking about, where you're just sort of aware, or maybe you roll over.
right.
Then you've got those deeper stages where we do our dreaming and all that kind of thing. And they all have their place and they all have their purposes. So
That's not a bad thing necessarily then, because that's happened
no,
always for me.
it's normal. It's
Okay.
perfectly normal. Yeah.
As
I
long as
think
we're not
everybody's
getting up out of bed all the time.
correct. And I
Right.
think everybody's sleep is different. And so that's where we'll start. So, there's lots of reasons why people can't sleep, right? And those reasons could be, because you ate a heavy meal before you went to bed, or they
Right.
could be because you had too much blue light, all that sleep hygiene stuff that you hear about. And those are easy fixes. Those aren't really anything so you just don't drink coffee before you go to bed, and usually you sleep better. But when you have issues that keep you from getting a good night's sleep more than 3 times a week, or persist for longer than 3 months, they call that a chronic sleep issue. And that's when you have to kind of dig a little deeper. Yeah.
There we go. Good. I'm glad you asked me that to start, because that's really one of the I mean, we sleep a third of our lives, right? It's
Very
important.
true.
It's
It's
important.
true. It
So
very
that's a
truly.
perfect segue then into melatonin. Where does that all play in a role in
Yeah,
this?
so that's exactly it. So most people, what do they do? That I imagine in your store, no different from any others. Melatonin seems to be the first line of defense when it comes to trying to find some kind of relief for why you can't sleep. And so it's a good place to start. It's a chemical that your body makes naturally, of course, and the brain produces it in response to darkness. It's mostly known as a sleep aid, right? But it doesn't knock you out like medications can. And I think to start the kind of conversation about getting away from it just for sleep is to understand that it actually is to set a circadian rhythm. It's part of your circadian rhythm. So circadian rhythm is our 24-hour internal clock in our brain, and that regulates not only sleepiness, but also alertness. So it's that 24-hour cycle. Um, and it does this by responding to light changes in our environment, also known as our biological clock.
Yeah, perfect. And so, one really important question that I wanted to know is like, it's not just sleep, right? They call this the wonder supplement. We're starting to find it in use in really bad immune situations and even autoimmune disease, but cancers. And we're not giving medical advice here. We're just discussing research and what's out there for consumers as an option. So tell us about this research on melatonin. It's not just more than sleep, right?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little history.
Yeah.
Melatonin was first discovered in the late 1950s, and they discovered it actually because the researchers that were actually working on it actually thought that it could change the melanin of our skin. And so they thought it could lighten the melanin of frogs and amphibians, and so that's where the word melatonin comes from, because they thought it was good for the skin, and they weren't that far off, because actually melatonin, just like vitamin D, is very protective of the skin. Um, and so I think that what happened was they started to research. One of the side benefits was that it helped with sleep. Also, it's a powerful antioxidant, and it's very good for healthy immunity as well. So those were the things that sort of started the interest in it. And then what happened was in early 1990s, the health food stores really started selling melatonin, but it really took off around mid 90s because I guess it got the attention of 2020 magazine. Do you remember that news show 2020?
Right.
So they did a program in 1995 on melatonin, and Newsweek magazine did a couple of articles as well. And that was really the year that launched it into stardom. But I found the article from Newsweek, and I found it really interesting that they really talked more about the anti-aging and the immune boosting, but it's the jet lag sleep support role that really stuck. And
Right.
I think it's because, we're sort of this pill for no society, right? And for a lot of people, the melatonin helped them with jet lag and sleep. And so before you know it, melatonin became known as the sleep supplement. And that anti aging and immune boosting just got pushed off to the wayside until
Interesting.
now. So that's really, I find that to be really interesting.
Yes.
Um,
I was
and
about to ask
so
you that too. Like, why is it just known as a sleep product or
Yeah,
sleep
I think
nutrient?
that's what it is. I mean, the average person comes in today, they're not looking for their basics like, how do I eat better? How do I take it? And okay, so here comes the nutritionist part of me. How do I eat better? What basic nutrients do I need to support my overall health? They're coming in saying I can't sleep, or my hair's falling out, or I can't lose weight, or fill in the blank, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's what happened with melatonin. It became like a sort of urban legend that this is good for sleep, and all the other benefits went by the wayside. Um,
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, and so it's actually isn't it a hormone truly? Like it's same thing
it
similar
is.
like vitamin D. Vitamin
It
D is
is.
actually a hormone pumped out into the bloodstream by the kidneys. It's not just it's not a vitamin truly. So is melatonin it's also a hormone, correct?
It is, and that's the really interesting part, I think, is so it's a hormone-like substance, although the NIH actually calls it a hormone. And much like vitamin D, It's a part of the circadian rhythm. So, when you think about, your daytime support comes from vitamin D, your nighttime support comes from melatonin, but we're very good about taking our vitamin D every day, right? We're
Right.
not so good about thinking about melatonin as part of that circadian rhythm. And I think that that's the point I really love to get across to people is we want to support not just the daytime support of our biological clock and our circadian rhythm, but we want to support the nighttime part of it as well. So in the morning, and I think a lot of people know this, you take your vitamin D in the morning, it's the sunshine hormone or the
Yeah.
sunshine vitamin, and it's something that energizes you. So you take your melatonin opposite that in the evening before you go to bed because it's the nighttime hormone and it supports the second half of that cycle. Make sense?
Absolutely. And let's hear you've mentioned circadian rhythm several times, and a lot of us that are deep in the health space, they know what this is, but let's back up, do like a little 10,000-foot bird's eye view.
Sure.
I say that a lot in this podcast, 10,000-foot
I
bird's eye view, meaning
like
let's
it.
look down as like a general, what is the circadian rhythm?
Right. So the circadian rhythms are 24-hour internal clock in our brain, and it regulates the cycles of alertness and sleepiness. So basically, it tells you when you're supposed to go to sleep and when you're supposed to wake up. But it's not just that. It also regulates hormones. It has effect on body temperature, so metabolism, lots of other body systems. And I guess that's the part. And circadian rhythm, also known as our biological clock. So think about that in terms of what our biological clock actually is, right? We're designed to procreate, right? So
Right.
that yeah, so it's really all a part of, and that's what the hormones are also supporting. It's really all connected, and that's why I like it for overall fundamental support as opposed to just thinking of it for sleep. Yeah.
And you sort of hinted there that it's supposed to start climbing at sunset, right? And as the
Yes,
day progresses, it slowly starts going up while cortisol starts going down. They have that inverse curve. Do you
they
want to hit
do.
on that a little bit more? And how does melatonin work exactly? How does it plug in?
Sure. So that, so in order to understand that, you have to kind of go back into the brain, into the hypothalamus gland. And it's that I call them the hypothalamus, the mastermind of sleep. And it's a gland in your brain that links your endocrine system, which is basically the glands that control our hormones, to our nervous system that controls our circadian rhythms. So buried deep in this hypothalamus is this little area of the brain. It's called the SEN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Nobody needs to remember that big term. But what it is it's a gatekeeper for messages of light and dark. And so it signals to different parts of the brain, when should I release cortisol? So it's time to wake up. And when do we release melatonin so we can sleep? So in the case of melatonin, it signals to a tiny little gland called the pineal gland. And it's in the shape of a pine cone. That's why they call it pineal.
Mm,
And that's where the melatonin in the brain is actually made.
interesting.
Yeah.
Fascinating right there. So how much should one take if they're going to be supplementing? I know there's so many different doses. What's a good starting point that you in particular like? We're not giving advice here on what everybody should take, but which one
Right.
do you like through natural factors? There's different doses. Where do we start here?
Well, most melatonin is made in lots of different dosings because
Right.
people are different, and we're at different stages of melatonin production
Yeah.
at different ages of our life as well. Um, so recommending dosing is hard. What I
Yep.
what I like to recommend is that you start very low and see how it affects you. And I prefer you start on a weekend when you don't have to get up the next morning, just in case. Because for some
Smart.
people, they don't feel any effect, no sleepy effect from melatonin, whereas others are very sensitive to it. So I think it's a good idea to start low. Natural Figures makes it in 1, 3, and 5 milligrams. We also have it in formulas that have 10 milligrams for
Oh, okay.
some people. That's what's needed. But I do want to touch on, you touched on something about how much you should take. And I want to just point out the difference. Some people will say, I don't want to take too much because then my body will stop
Right.
producing it. You've heard that.
Oh yeah.
And so I found some really interesting research that talked about melatonin production as we age. So it turns out, and this will be a surprise to absolutely no one to learn, that babies don't develop a circadian rhythm until they're about 3 months old. So anybody who knows
Wow.
children, mystery solved, or has children, mystery
Right.
is solved. And so at that 3 month point, that's when melatonin production begins with babies, and it shoots up really fast. And it shoots up until I guess early early ages, up until puberty. Puberty is actually the point at which it starts to decline, right? I mentioned biological clock before. Isn't that interesting, that correlation,
Oh yeah.
that that's when the decline begins? And as it begins, by the time we're 35, we're making half, maybe less than half what we made when we were like 12.
Wow.
And so by the time we hit like 55, 60, we're making almost none. Very little melatonin is being produced by the body. So anybody who thinks, oh, I can't take it because then I'll stop producing it, you're not producing it anyway. And so I think, and here's where it gets interesting for me, as that production begins to go down, we start to see all these chronic illnesses start to rise. And I kind of think that that's an interesting correlation, because as you know, our biological clock is ticking, right? We're not required to create new life anymore, right? So all of a sudden, we're designed to start breaking down. So taking regular melatonin can be, I don't know, I almost want to say anti-aging, because it
Yeah.
helps keep that production higher. I think that's
Amazing.
really interesting.
That's deep. That's deep, Maria.
Yeah.
No, no, that's amazing. And that word, that term anti-aging's thrown around a lot, but
Uh-huh.
in the true sense of the word, you just broke down how it actually is doing that and
Yeah.
involved in that process of slowing down the aging process.
Yeah,
So,
there's a doctor, Deanna Minnick,
yeah.
and her team that put out an incredible article. It's not so much a study as an abstract that talks about a lot of great information around how melatonin and vitamin D actually do all of the same things. I mean, I think during the pandemic, we learned an awful lot about what vitamin D does. Turns out melatonin does all those same things. The only thing that melatonin does that vitamin D doesn't is help you sleep. Kind of
Interesting.
interesting.
Wow. So melatonin then is going to be playing a role in bone health as
Yep.
well, and things of that nature.
It's a
And
powerful.
skin. You said skin too. Yeah.
Yep. It's a powerful antioxidant. I think most people know that. That's not a surprising one. But it's I call it a super antioxidant. Actually, much 4 times as powerful as vitamin C. When an antioxidant goes in, how antioxidants work is they go out looking for free radicals in the body. And those are really, what that means is cells that aren't terribly stable and are starting to cause some trouble. And what it does is it gives up an electron, and it helps make that cell more stable so it doesn't cause more damage, right? So with vitamin C gets in the body, can give up one electron, and then it's done. Melatonin can give up as many as 4 electrons before it's spent and finished. So I call it a super antioxidant. I think that's pretty cool.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's also an interesting thing to note, and I think most people don't know, that melatonin is also made in our gut,
Hmm.
but it's not uh, activated by light and dark in the gut. It's activated in the gut by food and digestion. Very
Hmm.
interesting, right?
Uh-huh.
It actually creates healthy epithelial cells and protects the mucosal lining, I guess is what I should say. And it's important that for that area, because the gut is important for absorbing nutrients and protecting us from intestinal bacteria. So, and of course, the gut and the brain are very connected, right? So
Right.
it's not really surprising.
You've taught me a lot today on melatonin, that's for sure. I'm
It's
taking mental
interesting
notes
stuff.
here.
It
This
really,
is good.
truly
That's why I
is.
love doing that's why I love hosting this show, because I'm always learning something new.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Natural Factors has the 1, 3, 5 milligram options. Some
Hmm.
formulas like the Tranquil Sleep perhaps has 10
Yep.
milligrams in there.
Exactly.
And
Well,
go ahead.
since
Yep.
you brought up natural factors, I want to share something very
Please.
interesting with you. So, melatonin was originally sourced, believe it or not, from the pineal gland of animals.
Yeah,
That's when they
that's right.
first started making it. And,
That's true.
they realized that this wasn't really very safe um, or clean. And so they took the production of melatonin to the lab. And most of what's on the shelf is synthesized in the lab. It's not a natural supplement. Natural Factors is the exception. So, Natural Factors melatonin is actually made from a proprietary amino acid, which is then fermented for better absorption. And to my knowledge, it's the only one that does this. So, I mean, I'm certainly open to hearing about other brands that may do something similar, but I think that that's a really much better absorbed form. And
Right.
the one I switched to when I started working with Natural Factors.
So you brought this up a little bit earlier on people are afraid that their body's going to start making it if they start to take it regularly as a supplement. Can you highlight that a little bit more? Will my body stop producing it if I start to take it regularly as a supplemental form before bed?
Well, no, and that's what I was saying earlier. As you get older, you're producing less of it. So this is,
Exactly.
that's what the word supplemental comes from, right? It's a supplement. So I'm not making enough, so I'm going to supplement with a little bit more. But by the time we're in our early 50s, we're really not making very much at all. And so for those of us who have reached that point, it's kind of important to support your overall health with a melatonin supplement, like you do with vitamin D. So that's why I want people to think of it in terms of
Okay.
how vitamin D works. That and the reasons you take vitamin D, those are the same reasons you should take melatonin.
Very interesting. Or vitamin C. You even hinted at that earlier, how they're all
Mhm.
working together.
They
Exactly.
are.
If vitamin D, oh, no one bats an eye of supplementing that one. Very good point. Very, very
Yeah.
interesting. Um, with the clear market drop that happens with age, the production of melatonin, even more reason. Very good case for supplementing potentially with melatonin. Obviously, where do you start? Well, we can't answer that just from an interview like this. Someone might need
Right.
5, someone might need 10. Work with your doctor. But what are some signs? Actually, just kind of there's that 10,000-foot bird's eye view of
Yeah.
how they should know if they need a bit more milligrams of it. What are some things to look out for? How do they know they should be aiming for a 5 versus a 0.3 milligram?
That's a great question. I'm not so sure I know how to answer
Okay,
that. That's I think
I got you.
the
I
most
got you.
yeah, the most important thing is that everybody's different. And so, if you might not think you need it, right? And so if you
Right,
don't need it, maybe start with, a very low dose of 1 milligram a day and see how that changes things. I think there's experimentation as well. You can't get melatonin from too many foods. I can't remember off the top of my head. I feel like tart cherries or something. But it's not like you can get it from food, much
right.
like vitamin D. You can't really get it from food. So yeah, I don't think there's any harm, and that's there's only benefit, I think. And I would urge you to find that abstract from, or I can send it to you,
Please do.
because
Yeah.
it's fascinating the information they came up with.
Right. You mentioned the cherry. Some tart cherry can have
Yeah.
melatonin in it, but it's not really easy to find in food. It's more of something where you have to eat the right nutrition to then help it get produced. It's not going to
I
really
will
be
tell you
found in foods.
this.
Go ahead.
That's a great point.
The
Again, I always come from
cofactors.
the food background, right? So the precursors to melatonin. So in order for the pineal gland to make melatonin, the body needs the amino acid tryptophan.
Right.
And tryptophan is found in protein-rich foods like meats and milk and eggs and soybeans. And of course, we know the most famous one of all, turkey. But it's not a direct line from tryptophan to melatonin. There's other steps. It first has to get converted to 5-HTP. Then 5-HTP gets converted to serotonin. And eventually, if all those pathways are working well, melatonin's produced. But the thing that nobody really talks about is, in order for that pathway to progress, there's certain nutrients and enzymes that have to be present. And that includes things like calcium and magnesium and iron and zinc. All the B vitamins are important, like vitamin C, and lots of enzymes. And so if those pathways aren't working properly, or you're not getting all of those things I just mentioned from food, very hard for your body to make melatonin.
Great point. I'm glad we covered that. Yeah, you want to
Yeah,
make sure you're hitting all these other nutrients from food, and that will then allow you to make the melatonin in the body, hopefully. Uh, how can people measure their melatonin levels? Is this
You
how do
know,
we?
you can measure, I've had this question before. From what I understand, it can be measured in saliva, it can be measured in the blood, but none of them are terribly accurate because when you think about, your production of melatonin, it starts, it ebbs and flows, right? It's sort of like, I don't know if anybody's ever had their cortisol level checked, right? Cortisol, you have to check at 7:30 in the morning or before 7:30 in the morning if you have blood work done. Well, you're not going to find a lab open at 2 a.m. when your melatonin is at its highest,
Right.
So I think it's hard to test for that
Exactly.
as far as, and I don't think you're going to find too many doctors who are going to agree to test for it unless you're having
Yes.
some serious issues.
Yeah, we've done cortisol tests like the salivary 4x a day cortisol to check the
And you
cycle,
could,
but
right.
melatonin's tougher.
Well, you can do it. You can do the salivary test for melatonin. From what
Right.
I understand, I don't know which test exactly it is, but think about it. You're going to interrupt your sleep all night to find
Exactly.
out where your levels are. It doesn't sound to me like that makes sense. Whereas cortisol is easier. You're awake during the day.
Well, this was an action-packed show, very information dense. Maria, thank you so much for covering all this incredible melatonin information. This is going to help a lot of people. I
Hope
learned
so.
something. I'm sure our listeners are going to walk away with some good knowledge here. What's a good take home? What would you leave us with? What's a nice thing you want our customers to walk away with? And then some resources to stay in the loop.
I would say talk to the folks in the health food stores. They really are knowledgeable people and they know what they're talking about. And we spend a lot of time making sure that we get information out to them. Natural Factors does a really good job of that with a lot of education for our team members in the stores. Um, Starting with a low dose of melatonin and taking it regularly and seeing how that affects your overall health after maybe a year, I think would be a really great thing.
I appreciate you having or taking the time and coming on for your first episode here on the podcast. I hope I get to talk to you soon, Maria. Thank you so much for your time.
Dr. Dan, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.